Right. Good morning, everybody. We are now opening the final Finance and Audit Committee meeting for the term. So we'll just have our apologies. I'll do the health and safety first, but there is no members of the public here, so I'll ask that people read their screens and follow the directions of the staff. So that's the health and safety, so now we'll go to the apologies. And we have received apologies from Councillor Dingwall and Councillor Harpeta. Are there any others that I'm not aware of? And you're seconding Councillor Naylor, so that's moved. So we'll vote. Oh, we're not ready? Hang on, we'll just wait a second. We'll just reboot the system. Morning. And that is carried unanimously. Right, we'll just move on. Now we have two councillors, or we will have two councillors online. Now people, can you please stop chattering? I can't hear. All got excited because it's the last meeting. Okay, so we've got last finance meeting. Councillor Mickelard and Councillor Dingwall will be online, so please make sure cameras are on, please. Now, we're now moving on to additional items, which I'm not aware if there are any. So we'll now move on to declarations of interest. I'm not aware of any. No public comment. And we'll go on for confirmation of the minutes. And I plan to move both part 1 and 2 together. So if there's any comment, we'd have to move into part 2. So everybody happy with that? So that's seconded by Councillor Naylor. So are there any comments regarding the minutes? There being none, we will move to vote. And that is carried unanimously. We now move on to item number 6, which is the Assurance Report Sustainable Practices Review, and that will be presented by Ms. Suma Akhtar, and she's Assurance Manager, and we've got our Chief Planning Officer, David Murphy, and online we have Sarah Bagel from KPMG. Welcome, Sarah, if there's any questions for any of those three. So I'll move it over to you guys to start when you're ready. And that's on page 15.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking this report. I will begin with asking Sarah to just give some high-level commentary or introducing the report, because they are the ones that did it. The reason we outsourced it was because it is a more specialised review and we didn't have the skill set or capacity internally to do it. So I'll get Sarah to start and then I might add to it later.
Okay, thank you. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much. So this report was looking at the sustainable practices across the council. We focused on 4 key, what we consider to be kind of domain areas. Those are governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. I guess the overall summary is that the maturity at council is relatively low, but I would say not unexpectedly low for a small council within New Zealand, with the constraints that you have around resourcing, particularly for specialist resource in some of these very rapidly emerging areas. What we found was that there was a real disconnect between the strategic intent, we believe, of the council in terms of delivering improvements in wellbeing, and how that was then being translated through the organisation and into people recognising that sustainability thinking was actually a key part of everyone's role in how they actually deliver improvements in wellbeing. Again, not unexpected, and I don't want to seem overly critical here, because what we did find was that there was enormous enthusiasm amongst many members of council staff to integrate more of this thinking into how they worked. There was a desire for a clearer mandate, and that went all the way through the organisation, the different levels that we spoke to. So I think there are some key things that can be done. The first of which is really clarifying those roles and responsibilities at the senior levels for sustainability, and sustainability in its broadest sense. Council currently has a climate change team, a 2-person climate change team, but the focus on climate change, while obviously really important in the current climate, is actually limiting the perspective on sustainability as a much broader issue, including impacts on council from environmental issues, the impact council has on social issues, and that broader governance perspective on sustainable wellbeing. So I think there were some key recommendations, as I say, the first being identifying clear accountability at the senior level. From the strategy perspective, the recommendations really centred around integration and actually considering how to embed that strategic view of sustainability through into operations. From a risk management perspective, the enterprise risk framework has not identified any key sustainability risks as material. We think that will evolve quite rapidly over the next few years, so it's really important that there is some focus on particularly the developing litigation risk, developing social risk, developing environmental risk, and from both perspectives, I guess the double materiality perspective, both how those things will impact council, but also the impact that council has on those things within your area of jurisdiction. And then within metrics and targets, there were some recommendations around increasing the scope of key measures and particularly establishing KPIs around some key measures as part of your long-term planning process to ensure that, again, your staff have got a really clear mandate about how they deliver sustainability as they deliver the long-term plan. So I don't want to go into too much more detail. I will take the report as read, so very happy to answer any questions or provide any more insights into the approach we took or any of the recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Is there anything further, Ms Suma?
Yes, sorry, I might just add a couple of things. I would just like to acknowledge that on Appendix 2, we've listed the staff that were interviewed or that contributed to this review, but what we haven't noted is that we did reach out to elected members, and 2 elected members have also contributed to this review. So that's an oversight on my part. Sorry, I didn't pick up on that when I reviewed the report. Whilst we've got a basic rating, I think that's just suggesting that there's scope for improvement. I would like to emphasise that this review was a process review. It is not a comment on the delivery of any work that officers are doing. It's more just suggesting and acknowledging that at a governance level we've got a goal, and that goal has some plans under it, and the plans have some actions in it that we should be doing. On the other end, operationally, we have work that is being done. We're just missing that middle piece, which is a framework that coordinates that work and that aligns the work that we're doing to the goal and says, this is how we're achieving that goal. And if there are any gaps, then that's when we will pick up on it. So that's the gap that's materially being recognised through this review. Normally, we would come back with an action plan. So we've got a report, we've got the recommendations, and would say this is how we're going to go about it. But as you can see, that's not a small piece of work to do. And I think we do need some time to go back and consider the different things that we can do and how we can best do that. Capacity needs to be taken into account. So that's something we'll come back with in the new year to you and say this is how we plan to deliver on the recommendations, and I'll be working closely with David and Adam to do that. But otherwise, happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Can I just start off, and it's probably around your plans and resources. So have we got, it's going to take sort of 3 to 5 years to get this to a good level. So have we got budgets and resources already planned and already set in our LTP for this, or are you going to require additional resources and money?
That's something we'll be considering as part of developing that action plan, is what do we already have in place, what is that capacity, what's already funded, what's not, and then come back and say, if we didn't think we had enough, the action plan would come with a recommendation on what direction, well, would seek direction from you, as in you could either fund this or we could accept the risk of not doing it.
Okay, thank you. Right, now we have the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Ms Suma. Just in terms of the next steps, with the detailed action plan, is it expected at this stage that all of the recommendations within this report would go straight into the action plan, or is the first stage to determine what actually will be accepted within the actions listed in the report?
That is normally the first step. So we will firstly work with management recommendation by recommendation and ask, are we accepting this? And then if we are, how are we going to go about it? It's quite rare to not accept a recommendation at all, but what they might suggest is an alternative way in addressing the same risk, in which case we'd analyse that, bring it back. If they do wish to accept a risk and not do anything about it, then we bring that back to council to accept that risk. So you are the ones that will ultimately have to accept it, but would note that in the action plan and say there's no action here.
Okay, and so if there's also an alternative pathway forward to achieve particular outcomes, would that also be, any discrepancies also be reported through alongside the action plan? If
I felt that the action that they wanted to take wouldn't address this risk, then yes, that would be highlighted.
Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Ms Suma, for the report. I sense that there is a real disconnect, obviously, between work groups within council, and just really following on from Madam Chair, do we really get a sense of a shortfall at this stage in terms of resources to be able to close those gaps?
Through you, Madam Chair. I think, as indicated in the management comment included on page 16 to 17, certainly while the executive leadership team is yet to fully, I guess, review the report and prepare that action plan, as you'll see, I think, look at the initial first scan of the report indicates that it's going to require a careful consideration of further resourcing to implement those recommendations. As I also said in the management comment, the focus to date, and I think it was picked up by Sarah, has been on the headline target of Goal 4 to reduce emissions. So when we look at the focus of our activities at the moment has very much been around environmental sustainability. I think one of the things we will need to, and again it's noted in the management comment, I think one of the things we will need to grapple on in terms of considering this report and thinking about the resourcing and the action plan is being really clear about what we mean by sustainability and environmental sustainability. So for instance, when Sarah spoke, she talked about sustainability at its broadest context in terms of social, what we describe as the four well-beings. I think there are parts of the report that can be interpreted, and as Masuma talked about, she referenced Goal 4, which tends to be the environmental sustainability lens, and the types of activities that we see coming through Councillor Barrett's committee in terms of a focus on environmental sustainability. So in terms of the way we assess and respond to this report, I think we need to be clear about what we mean by sustainability and what we mean by environmental sustainability and where we want the focus to be, because that will result in quite a different response in terms of the action plan. So I know that's a relatively long answer to what was a short question, but in summary, this will require careful consideration of resourcing as part of future processes, and we need to be clear about what our objectives are.
Yeah, thanks, David. That's really helpful. And I suppose where I was going with this is, to me, the read of the report is that it will actually require a significant cultural shift across the organisation to make sure that there is joining up. Would that be a fair comment?
I think there is more coordination required, for sure, because they are working in silos, like everybody might be going and doing their part that they think they should be doing, but there's no overarching, yes, everybody's doing the part they should be doing, and this is how it all fits together. So you will need some form of more coordination there.
Great. Thanks, Masuma. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Masuma, and thanks, Sarah Online. As this talks about strategy and governance, and you mentioned in a brief note at the end there that council was involved, I can't recall this unless it was a fleeting email that we got. And as we're such a big part of this, why aren't we a part of this? If there's only two, I would have thought as one team of council that there should be elected members, well, there should be more elected member comment in this. Is that an error, or is it just the terms of reference? It was purely just management and staff?
Sorry, so I can tell you what I did do, which was I did send an email out, as I do with every review, to all elected members, and I asked if anybody was happy to contribute or had some perspectives to share, then that they do. And maybe it was timing, maybe it got missed, but that's how we normally go about it. And the ones that came back, we interviewed, and they contributed. What involvement would you have liked?
Well, I think for such a big, it showed up some, I mean, Councillor Hancock spoke about the...
Perhaps if you could leave that to comments, Mr Mayor.
Can I finish?
Yes, but comments, not questions.
It's not a comment, it's getting the question back out there. So do you think we should be more involved in this?
It would have been nicer to have a higher uptake, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I'll leave my rest to comment.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Masuma and Sarah and David. My understanding is this maturity level, or the categories of level, limited, basic, intermediate, and whatever, these are based on a tool we used, and that tool was KPMG. Is that the only tool in the country other councils are using, number one? Number two, will there be a different category or a different level if we use another tool?
I think every tool is definitely produces different kind of categories, but normally the outcome doesn't really change. It might be, someone might have high, medium and low, so it's terminology more than where you actually fit into it, but I might ask Sarah to comment on that.
Yes, I'm happy to. So the tool is based on New Zealand and regional and global sustainability standards and best practice. So I would imagine that there are many equivalents of this tool, both within New Zealand and overseas, and they're actually all going to be looking at pretty much the same thing and all looking at a very similar scale. So yeah, I would support Masuma's view that we would expect to see very similar results.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Masuma, and thank you, David and Sarah as well. A couple questions. The first, if I might, for you, Sarah. Thank you for the introductory comments. In those, you referenced accountability at the senior executive level. Just wondered if you could give us a bit more insight around that in terms of what you would see as being effective in that regard.
Well, I think the most obvious step is very clearly identifying an individual or several individuals with accountability for delivering sustainability. And again, as David was saying, defining the breadth of sustainability that you want to be encompassed by that. The feedback that we received when we were investigating was that there was actually no clear ownership of that breadth of sustainability. There were obviously clear reporting lines for the climate change team through council to the leadership team, but there is no leadership role that sees themselves as being the owner of sustainability or group of people who see themselves collectively as being the owners. And so that obviously causes quite a lot of challenges in terms of operationalising.
Mm. Thank you. Thinking about that from a skill set point of view, like if we were looking for a person to be in charge of the money, we'd probably look for somebody with accounting skills, et cetera. Is sustainability something that does have a specific enough skill set associated with it that it needs to be viewed through that lens, or is it kind of a generic thing that you can just tack on to a job title?
So we are increasingly seeing dedicated sustainability roles. Certainly the larger councils have people with specific ESG or sustainability roles on the leadership team. For a council the size of PNCC, and I think this is obviously the challenge that you're all dealing with every day, it will be very difficult, I think, to find somebody or in fact resource that role. There are ways to obviously shore up that. You've done that obviously by pulling us in for this review. There are a lot of small consulting firms that can support, but also there are key capability development opportunities that can be provided to the leadership team and indeed to elected members who are interested to facilitate the right questions. And so much of it is actually about the right questions and getting your right risk management settings and your accountability settings right. And that then starts to filter down through the organisation without making a whole a new level of bureaucracy around it.
Mm. Thank you, Sarah. The other question that I had around your recommendations was just if you give us some insight in terms of what you think would be useful in terms of kind of monitoring and tempo of monitoring of our journey from here. So
we recommend that that this report is essentially turned into something like a 3 to 5 year roadmap with actions throughout. And for the first year, we would suggest checking in ideally quarterly, at least 6 monthly. If things seem to be underway, a lot of those first year actions will actually kind of push that snowball off the top of the peak and it will start rolling down, building its own momentum. And so the monitoring from council's perspective could extend out further. But I would say with with this kind of shift, and I think, your colleagues have already identified that this is a cultural shift. It requires a change in thinking of many people in different roles across council. So the more focus they see elected members putting onto this, the more they will recognise that it is something that you value and that you feel is important, and that will have an enormous impact on the speed and quality of delivery.
Thank you, Sarah. Masuma, can I ask around the participants as well? You gave us a summary of how we got to where we got to with elected members. On the staff side of it, how is that done? There's a short list there of staff that had participated.
A very similar approach. Well, normally internally it is quite easier to pinpoint people and be like, we need you for this review and book in an interview. But otherwise we do send an email to the leaders forum, so we've all the leaders, people leaders, also staff leaders, and we ask if they or anyone in their team would like to contribute, just in case we miss somebody. That's how we try to fill that gap in.
So it's kind of an opt-in, volunteer-in type model?
I'd say it's a hybrid. I'd say if we know that we need somebody, we'd definitely get them in. But if we miss somebody, then we try to capture them through that generic email.
Cool, thank you. And finally, Madam Chair, just wanted to ask, obviously we've taken an outsourcing approach with the review. Is there a view yet around whether we would be outsourcing some of the ongoing development of action plans, et cetera? Or do we have the internal capacity that was missing on the review side so that we could do that internally?
To develop the action plan, I don't think we'd need to outsource that. We can do that, but to outsource the actions when we need to, the delivery of them, that will be part of the development of the action plan, so that will come back and we'll tell you if we need to outsource any of that and if we don't have funding for it.
Great, thank you all, Madam Chair.
Mr. Armstrong?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Masuma, David and Sarah. My questions have largely been addressed through the questions from Councillor Barrett, but perhaps for you, Sarah, just to close that discussion or exchange out. For a council our size and where we are in terms of our state of readiness, from what you've seen, is there anything in particular that will make us successful as we go forward that hasn't been covered in this exchange? What else would you share with us that's valuable taking this forward?
So we've obviously already talked about the importance of establishing those key KPIs through the long-term plan. That's going to be crucial. I would say for a council your size, the other key lever for sustainability actually is procurement. What we're seeing is many councils are using the procurement function as the real gatekeeper for sustainability, to begin with a focused, standardised approach to ensure that every step that goes outside the organisation is requiring suppliers, requiring input and thinking around how sustainability is being addressed. And that itself can lead to better practice around the rest of the organisation, because particularly if you've got as I understand you do, you have quite a distributed procurement operation, it will spread that capability and that sustainability thinking, again, across quite a wide range of people around the organisation.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Masuma, did you want to add?
I just wanted to add to one of the questions that's come up a couple of times around participation, and I'd realised I've answered that a couple of times myself, but I haven't really asked Sarah, and I just wanted to check if she wanted to make or share any observations around the coverage that we had of the participants, and if she felt like that was enough, or did we not have enough, kind of thing, from her perspective.
I think, Masuma, that it was actually helpful to have the range of people that we did from different levels across the operation. I think I'm confident that we did actually get a representative view, although with the caveat that there will undoubtedly be little pockets of activity. But that then just underlines the whole message of the report that this activity is not happening currently in an integrated and coordinated way. So I'm pretty confident with the response. I think in terms of managing the delivery, as councillors have already identified, it'd be really helpful to have more kind of interest and direct oversight and support from council, because that's what gives leadership the mandate to make change happen.
Thank you. Our final question is Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just one question from me. It may be for governance, actually. In terms of the next steps of that action plan coming back, it says in the next steps that it'll come back to Finance and Audit Committee. On page 16, it said that it'll come back in the first quarter of 2023. Is that the calendar year?
Councillor Naylor, it'll be to the most appropriate committee.
Yes, I'm aware.
And timing.
That's calendar year, yes.
So you're talking about the early part of
Jan
next
to
year,
March-ish.
rather than, yeah, it's just sometimes the year is the financial year. Yeah, and I note that it's not currently on the work plan, so will that be included in the work plan? Cool, thank you.
Are there any further questions, councillors, before I... Okay, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you, Masuma and David. So we'll now move to the recommendation, and I'll just read that out for those online, that the committee receive the memorandum titled Assurance Report Sustainable Practices Review and its attachment presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on the 28th of September 2022. Do I have a mover for that? Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Councillor Naylor. So are there any comments? Deputy Mayor used to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, I thought this was a really good report. It was really useful in terms of identifying where some of the disconnect is and the gaps are, and I think that the action plan that will come out of this is going to provide a really useful framework for the coming years. My read is that there will be an expectation, particularly on local government, to really step up in the sustainable practices space or responding to climate action. And so I think that this is going to be a really useful piece of work to provide a mechanism forward for that, and hopefully elevate and provide a bit of coordination as well, which I think will fill some of the gaps. But overall, I thought that this was really useful. So yeah, I'll just thank the people involved for the report.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too want to just thank the authors of the report, and I think, as the Deputy Mayor said, it sort of highlights where we're at and perhaps some of the gaps. But we started this journey, as what you all know, about 6 years ago, and just want to push back on a couple of the comments. Council our size. I went to the Climate and Business conference with Councillor Naylor and Councillor Butt just the other week, and we aren't a small council. We're actually the 8th largest urban council in the country. So we should be doing some of this work, and I thought we'd be perhaps a little bit further ahead than we are, but we have made some progress. But in saying that, it's clearly identified that the governors, the council perhaps should be a bit more involved in this, and I understand that efforts were made to get us involved, but perhaps we may need to look at how we do that in the future, because it isn't just senior management and staff. We've got to be doing this all together. We've got to give some direction and be involved in it. It showed that we need to be, certainly in the management space, need to be better aligned and coordinated, along with governance and the rest of the staffing team. But it needs to be a sustainability lens on everything. And it pretty well is a different way of working today, really, when you think about it. And it's understanding roles, and that's both from a governance and a management perspective. In the terms of extra resources, at the conference we saw perhaps managers that were purely managers in a sense in earlier days, but now the sustainability lens was over their role as well. And I think that could be be said for everything here, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's parks and reserves, whether it's front of house. It's how are we doing things with a sustainability lens. So again, I think we can do this, and we have started the journey. We've highlighted where some of the gaps are, but I really do think that sustainability lens needs to come over everything the council does now. And if we have that as our main priority, we should be getting to some of those goals. So again, thanks to the authors, and it sort of does highlight the gaps and where we need to make change. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and certainly endorse the comments that have just recently been made by the Deputy Mayor and Mayor. Found it a very useful report, and particularly want to thank Sarah and KPMG for giving us a good, frank appraisal of where things are at, as well as helping us chart a way forward. One of the things that really stood out to me, actually, is given the assessment, the absolutely incredible amount of work that the organization and individuals within it have achieved over recent years. And I think that's a real credit to the dedication and community mindedness of many of the team within council. And Chris, I think that's a really important message to get back to the team, is that while there's obviously a very clear message here around needing to improve, there's also been a huge amount done and achieved and well appreciated through the existing organizational structure. So I'm very much looking forward to getting the next stages of this back in terms of an action plan, implications for resourcing policies, what we do in terms of the executive level to make sure that this well and truly stays at the center of our focus in the future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and there's no further comments. I'm sure the Deputy Mayor doesn't want to. I didn't think she did. Right, we will now move to vote. And that is carried unanimously. We're now moving on to item number 10, which is the ozone replacement project, and that's on page 41, and that is going to be presented by Ms. Suma, and Business Assurance Manager, and Simon Lloyd-Evans, our Program Manager. So over to you two when you're ready. And that's on page 41.
Thank you. I'll just quickly introduce Simon next to me. He is our program manager for the ozone replacement program. We will take the report as read, but I might just have Simon introduce himself and just give a very, very high level update on the project.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So looking at the report, probably the key point is the status scorecard, the dashboard. The main comment there to make is where you see something that is that orange, light amber colour, these are stuff that would usually be expected in a project as it's being set up and formed. There's nothing here that's out of order in terms of what would be expected of this size project. The comments there around the scope is where we're looking at fleshing out some of the other components of the project. Obviously, it's a fairly significant replacement project, and there are other systems that are peripheral to it. So we're just making sure that we're capturing all those points. So that was really the main comment, is that the status report is exactly where we would expect it at this point.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Right, are we open to questions? Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you both for the update. I'm just looking at page 46, and there's a line there which is titled Key Dependencies. It talks about a potential conflict with authority altitude, and could you just kind of decode that for me? I don't really sort of understand what's meant in the narrative on that line.
Just trying to find the line.
page 46 of our report, which is key dependencies.
Okay.
And it's in light amber.
Yeah, the agreement of authority altitude work, having priority if conflict in time and resources. So what the larger program that I'm responsible for has some of those other peripheral systems. What we're saying there is if there's a conflict or contention of resources, then the core project of implementing authority altitude gets priority. So what we're saying there is that there are some ancillary work around some other systems, but they will take second place if we have a contention. So the key project is replacing ozone with authority altitude, and that will always take priority.
Yeah, great, thank you. And that's one of those conflicts could be I guess, the advent of the data warehouse. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, it's some of those are being discovered at the moment in terms of some of those reporting outputs, for example. So depending on the priority of those outputs, if we have someone that needs to work on one or the other, authority altitude comes first. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And just to really finish off, the blueprint design, so is there a timeline in terms of when that's going to be completed? Because that's referenced in the same.
Yes, so the blueprint's about 80% complete at this point in time, so we're expecting it by the end of next month.
Great, thank you, Simon, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mr Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Ms. Zuma and Simon. Can you just clarify for me, how long has ozone actually been in place in this organisation?
I would probably defer to someone who's been here longer, but I understand it's about 10 years.
Cameron?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, it's certainly been around longer than I've been here, but my understanding is between 10 and 15 years. So it's been entrenched here for a long time.
Thank you. And Simon, would you say, from what you've seen, it's a system where the processes are well documented?
Yes, they're well established. Part of the key component within this project is the configuration workshops. So what we're doing there is stepping through those processes and reassessing them in terms of how they fit with authority altitude. So yes, it's getting a much better level of documentation, configuring it in to the authority altitude. The existing system being 10 to 15 years old has got some processes that have evolved over time, so to accommodate idiosyncrasies of the system.
Okay. So in terms of how are you contemplating what's going to be quite a significant change for people who have been working around and living in the ozone place for the last 10 to 15 years, what sort of change management approach are you contemplating taking to make that transition seamlessly? How do you see that?
One of the key components there is the organisational impact assessment. So that's looking at the processes that have become over time established, as you recognise from an ozone perspective. Those individuals or key representatives of those groups are very heavily involved in the configuration workshops. So we're stepping through how you've done this in ozone versus how it will look in authority altitude. And then we're working through an education and training program to make sure that everybody's taken on board with that, so they understand what the new processes are, but the value to council is still the same at the end.
And just to add to that, we have a dedicated change management stream, and that's what's going to be leading up those two pieces of work as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And just in terms of the organisational bandwidth capacity to transition from something people are comfortable with, having been working and knowing it backwards over the last 10 to 15 years, to transitioning and putting something new in, I mean, how are you feeling about that?
The kick-off workshop was incredibly upbeat. There's a significant appetite within council for the replacement of a lot of people, a lot of staff recognise that they are doing things that are workarounds, historic workarounds, and there's definitely a healthy appetite to replace ozone with authority altitude. And the level of engagement, we've got about 110 people broadly on the project in terms of those workshops to understand all the configurations. So it's a very, very high level of engagement and enthusiasm.
So you're comfortable with the level of resourcing to make this change?
At the moment, yes, we've got budget for some backfill where we need to resource up. We've engaged with the appropriate subject matter experts and brought in the appropriate experts, for example, around the architecture space. So at the moment, yes, definitely well resourced.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my question's probably for the Chief Executive.
Right, go for it.
And just to preface it, I guess I just want to acknowledge it feels like we're taking a different approach with this, particularly with the cross-unit involvement and the 110 people mentioned. So I guess my question is around maybe the mechanics of staffing. So if we've got 110 people that we're pulling into this project, some of them will be dedicated specifically for this, what are we doing to support the teams that might be down a person for a day a week or those sorts of things to continue BAU and not increase the level of pressure that some of our staff are already experiencing in the organisation?
Thanks for the question. So there's not one thing, I guess. We've put a lot of effort into looking at the backfilling. It really mostly comes down to backfilling and so working with those individual teams and coming up with a plan for each individual team. So in some circumstances, we can reprioritise work and say, rightio, well, what aren't we going to do while we do this? Because I think first thing I'd say is I 100% agree with the point that this is not about just trying to get people to, work nights and weekends to make up the time. So in some circumstances, that will be the appropriate approach. In other circumstances, we have already started bringing in people to backfill. And, sometimes that's sort of direct backfilling. Other times it's sort of, working around that to try and sort of, put a person in here to allow that person to come in. So there's lots of various ways that we'll do it, but ultimately, to a large extent, it's going to come down to the budget that we have to backfill, through mostly sort of temp resources that we'll bring in to do that.
Okay, but I mean, it's obviously on the radar then in terms of...
It's a very big part of the change management process, yep.
Thank you.
Okay, there are no people further in the queue. Is anybody else? Okay, so we will thank you very much, Simon and Masuma. We will now move to the recommendation, which I will read out, that the committee receive the memorandum titled Kotuia Ozone Replacement Project Update and Assurance Framework and the attachment presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on the 28th of September 2022. I'm happy to move that, seconded by Councillor Hancock. It's good to see that we've got a good, robust report and that we've got quality assurance around this project. So thank you for the team for that, and it gives me heart moving on that you've got things in place that you're going to have good feedback and quality across this project. Is there anybody else wish to comment? There's no one, so we will carry on voting. And that is carried unanimously. We now move on to item number 8, which is on page 51, and that's the wastewater treatment plant consent request to bring forward a budget to complete. And we have Mike Monaghan, who's the group manager. So welcome, Mike, and go for it when you're ready.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, Madam Chair, your worship and councillors. The first thing I'd like to do is request that Anna Lewis, who's the project manager from Becca, can join us for these questions. Anna's here in the...
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah.
Please step down. And sorry, I didn't catch the name, Mike.
Anna Lewis.
Oh, Anna Lewis. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Through the chair. So we indicated in the quarterly report that the budget for the delivery of the project was at risk. This paper is presented to address that risk and to request that the budget is brought forward to meet the forecasted shortfall. So we'll take the paper as read, and we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Mike and Anna. Just very quickly, paragraph 6.1 just talks about the challenge workshop, and I think it says many work packages that weren't deemed necessary for the preparation of the consent. Those have been parked. The report doesn't really talk about the implications of that in terms of the scope and perhaps the longevity of the project itself. Like, what are the impacts?
Well, I'll have a go at that question first. I think the impacts are negligible at this stage because it's work that can be done post-lodgement, and we've indicated that we'll bring a report in December to carry on that work after this has been lodged. So all the work that was parked should have no impact on the lodgement of the consent.
Yeah, but we've I suppose what I'm trying to get at here is we've already extended the project team by 6 months, which of course has impacted in terms of actually us now requiring to bring some money forward. So does the deferred work packages, does that mean that that project team is going to have to stay in place longer? So I'm just trying to get a feel for any resource implications and costs that we might incur because of those deferments.
Through the chair, I can take this one if you like. One of the packages that we do not need to submit to Horizons is land use consents. So that was one of the matters that we have deferred. So that team will need to continue that work next year.
Sarah, thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, a big picture view, the consent work overall will go on for years because we expect the consent application to go to a hearing. So lodging is the first step for the resource consents that we have to get in by the end of the year. But there will be a number of other steps of consenting for various sorts of consents other than the RMA consent that will have to carry on for a number of years to get the overall project to completion.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I suppose I'm asking a question in terms of I'm trying to actually get some understanding of the size of that deferment and whether or not that is actually going to impact significantly on future budgets. That's where I'm trying to steer this.
Okay. Mike, would you like to follow?
Sorry, just find my notes. So there was a paper that came to Council last year by my predecessor that did indicate that budgets that would be required post-lodgement totalled 9.5 million. So it's 2.5 million for work up to lodgement and then some post-lodgement work for the following 2 financial years. And that was in the paper delivered to Council on the 1st of December 2021. So we fully expect the work that there is a large, there's a large amount of work to carry on once the consent has been lodged, and that's what we'll bring in December. We'll bring a paper to try and get a bit more detail around what that looks like and how much budget will be needed to carry on the work post-lodgement. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. While we're on budgets, on page 56, Mike, Can I just get some clarification that's on 8.1? You spent to date column, what period of time is that from?
I understand that's to the end of August 2022.
And it's the total project, it's not just this financial year, is it?
Total project.
Yep, that's fine, thank you. Okay, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Mike and Anna and others. So just on what Councillor Hancock was talking, 3.2. So, and I mean the money is what it needs to be to, obviously, with being this really important consent. But what happened there? Did the ask just not come through? Because you've identified that you needed the money, but somehow in the system it isn't there, yet it's been identified. Was it just an oversight? Change of personnel?
I believe it was an oversight.
Okay. Just on number 7 and our important partnerships there and engagement, just perhaps an update there. The memorandum of agreement with Whakatere, is that progressed any further, or?
Yep, yes, that has, Your Worship, that's been signed now and it's going back to Ngāti Whakatere.
Okay, brilliant. And elsewhere, how are we placed elsewhere?
Well, I think we're in a really good space. Anna is kind of heading that work up. You might want to pick up that relationship piece.
Yes, through the chair. The Rangatani involvement is very integrated with our project team, so that's been working really well, and that's been throughout the project. The Te Tumataka Hoki group has been commissioned through the Catalyst group. They have been attending our technical group meetings and also our project reference group, so yes, that's progressing well as well.
So they're engaging with us? Okay. That's fine, thank you.
Councillor Petrinas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your report. Now we have 3 months to run to lodge for the consent. Who is going to be doing your peer review and when?
So the peer review is ongoing, so each of the major work packages is peer reviewed in a timely manner as it's presented. So those work packages together will make up the final consent. So it's kind of peer reviewed on the go, and that's happening as we speak.
I just want to ask another question.
Yes.
Who is the peer reviewer?
Mott MacDonald peer reviewing the technical work, and Aqualink, the other one, doing the environmental river work.
Okay. Mr Mayor?
Sorry to jump back in, just one extra one. Mike, we're all on target for lodging before the end of the calendar year?
Yes, that's the plan.
Great, awesome, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and somewhat aligned to the Mayor's latest question. I asked this in the most recent meeting, but Anna, you weren't part of the group in the council chamber at that time, so I suppose somewhat this is looking for your perspective on it, but would welcome your comment as well, Mike, in terms of how we know when we're ready and kind of how that marries up with, you know, running out of time versus running out of money versus actually being ready, and how we're monitoring that.
I think I will let Hannah take that one if you're happy to.
Thanks, Mike. Through the chair. Councillor Barrett, yes, it's not unusual for us to be, and so my previous experience, just for your information, is with major infrastructure projects. So the last 3 to 4 months of these projects is always tiger by the tail, if I can say that here. And we are doing a majority of the technical work and assessment writing at this point. So this is real critical path time. It is not unusual for us to be all hands to the deck at this point, to be writing and matters coming up, and we're fixing them as we go, and our stakeholders are being involved with that, so it's quite normal. It is a really unusual situation with this project, given that the time frame is not based on when the consent expires, but by a arbitrary condition that's been applied. So it's unusual in that circumstance, but not unusual in the work that needs to be done prior to lodgement.
Thank you. So the key question there is how you're judging readiness.
Through the Chair, yes, one of the things that we are looking at is our project risks and our program. So my role is to work very closely with our Stantec team and with PDP. We do meet regularly as a technical team, and we also basically sort of raising matters as we go. We have Simpson Gresson on board as well, so Simpson Gresson will be part of that review team to look at the application prior to it being lodged. So there's a lot of moving parts at this stage to mitigate the risks, program, budget, readiness, in terms of the application to be complete.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Denison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 53 at the top, there's the capital budget, and each year it falls, which adds up to 391, and yet we promote a program of 500 million. Can I just understand, is that some of our wastewater budget, is that because it's operational? Or is that because the long-term plan figures haven't been reassessed?
Get Cameron to take that one.
Through you, Madam Chair, these will be based on the long-term plan figures because we haven't gone back and reset the budget based on any updated revisions beyond the current budget.
Yes, but for best information to date, we're working with a $500 million project, so these additional requests will fall within the overall figure we're working with currently, therefore?
The request to bring budget forward at the moment is based on the current budgets that we're working with, and any additional amount would have to come back through a decision-making process.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. There are no further questions. Just checking before. Okay, thank you both. You may step down. I will now read out the recommendations, and I have a third recommendation that is coming as well, so I'll read out the first two while they're typing up the third one. Number one is the council bring forward $280,000 from the 23-24 budget to the 22-23 year for the wastewater discharge consent project to enable the consent application to be completed and lodged. That council note a report will come to council in December 2022 in relation to tasks required and budgets needed to progress work after consent lodgement. And I have a third recommendation which has been seconded by Councillor Barrett, that a quality assurance framework from a business assurance be put in place for the wastewater discharge consent project. And I'll speak to this first. And the reason I want to put that in place is that this is a multi-million-dollar project, and I want the same rigorous lens over it as we've got with ozone. So this is just making sure that all our processes and everything are covered. So I'd just like to make sure that's in place before I go, so that you guys have got the comments. So Mr. Mayor's first up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, thanks to the officers and the project manager. Look, just echoing some of your comments, Chair, I mean, this needs to be a really robust consent. This is not something that you can sort of hope that we're going to get right. So I'm really happy to support all three recommendations. It's good to get an update, and again, thank the authors of the report. We need that partners' engagement and hopefully support, so it's great that there has been some progress there, and I look forward to hearing more. We must lodge this by December, at the end of December. There's no plan B. So it's vitally important that we fund it appropriately. So I'm happy with that in mind. I'm really happy to support the extra money being brought forward. Well, it's not extra, sorry, the money being brought forward. It's just something that we just have to do. And we've got to let the officers and the consultants get on and do this work, because it really is approaching D-Day very, very quickly. So fully supportive, and hope you all will be as well. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just had a question maybe to the CE about the resourcing implication of the third recommendation, because that looks like a big project, and just wondering if we could have a comment on either staff capacity or budget required to do that.
Thank you. Look, I obviously haven't had an opportunity to talk to the team about that, but definitely there's going to be requirements. We'll have to reprioritise work, so something will have to be pushed back. Do you want to make a comment? Can Ms. Suma make a comment as well? Since it'll be her team.
Ms. Suma.
Yeah.
I guess I just have a couple of things to clarify, if that's okay with you, Madam Chair.
Yes, certainly.
One would be, there would most definitely be a resourcing implication here, but the recommendation is to produce a framework, and so when I put the framework together, I think that's when I will have a good idea of what it is that it could cost us, and then maybe if I do need some support, I will come back to you. I do require clarification on whether this is to the lodgement point or if this covers implementation.
It covers implementation, so it's beyond your lodgement.
Okay.
So just going back, has those questions been answered? Councillor Johnson?
To some degree, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just indicating that I will actually support all three recommendations, in particular the need for some quality assurance. You would have seen by the sort of the general direction of my questioning that I do have some concerns about the deferred work packages, and I'm sure that if we have some quality assurance over this, we'll get a better understanding of how that will play out going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson. Sorry, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few brief comments to say thank you to the authors of the report. I think what came across really strongly is the rigour of our process in this, and particularly around that ongoing engagement with the wider community beyond Palmerston North, and that's really pleasing to see. I think what I've particularly appreciated and wanted to comment on specifically is the no surprises approach that's coming through this, and even this request to bring forward budget had been well signalled in the last time the officer reported. So that always makes this kind of conversation much more straightforward to know what's coming. And in that light, I echo Councillor Hancock's comments about the concerns of the deferred work programme. I think we do want to have a good line of sight as to what that means for budgets and deliverables going forward, and so I'll also be supporting recommendation 3 as well. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was happy to second all three recommendations, but wanted to first note appreciation to the staff for the tempo and quality of reporting here, and the huge amount of work that is going on. I thought Tiger by the Tail was probably quite a fair summary of where things would be at this stage, and wish the team well for the 3 months ahead. And the whole point of the third recommendation is to ensure that we really have as much organizational support and quality assurance around this very important piece of work as possible.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a final comment on it. It's been a project I've been involved in since I first came on council, so to see it finally get to its consent stage, it seems quite a miracle with all the barriers that's been in place. So well done to the team, and even if we do have to put some additional money into this, it's absolutely critical that we do have quality assurance over this project. So thank you very much for all those involved. We'll now go to vote. And that is carried unanimously. Do you want to do that now? Okay, I'll just pass across to Cameron just before we go to the next item, just to introduce our new finance manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whilst we've got our new finance manager in the room, some of you might be wondering who the new face is, but Scott, could you please stand up? This is our new finance manager who comes to us from Horizon. So welcome, Scott, to your first Finance and Audit Committee and day 2.
Excellent. So welcome, Scott. Right, well now we're going okay, so I think we'll go to their health and safety report and see if we can get that done before morning tea. So we're now on to item number 9, page 59, and that's the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Report, April to June 22, and that's been presented by Wayne Wilson, Acting Chief People and Performance Officer, and Selwyn Ponga Davis, Safety and Health Manager. So over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to start by welcoming or introducing Selwyn. At the end of June, Alan retired from the Health and Safety Manager role, and Selwyn started in August with us in the role. So although this report doesn't relate to the time he was here, I thought it was important to bring him along so that if any technical questions come up, he may be able to answer those. Apart from that, I'll take the report as been read and just take any questions.
Thank you. First up is the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Wayne. Welcome, Selwyn. Just a question around the Health and Safety Quarterly Dashboard Report. So under the critical risks, specifically looking at, first question is, are these descriptions essentially copied from what staff are putting in when they notify the incident? Are they copy and pasted in, or are they, is there somebody that is summarising and writing this?
No, they are summarised,
Okay.
But it's taken directly from what has been said in the report.
Sure. Okay, so under threatening behaviour incident, can you give me an explanation as to where the threshold is for when we involve the police? And I guess specifically what triggered the question is the 4th incident, which doesn't seem to be too different in terms of the nature of what happened to some of the other incidents, but there isn't any mention of police involvement for that one.
Yeah. That's at the discretion of the people involved, whether they believe that it is, meets the threshold, and so I would be surmising here, so I'm sorry. It may well be that they feel more confident or competent in dealing with the issue than perhaps others. But we do have, as part of our standard operating procedures, that staff should contact the police where they feel it is appropriate. Yeah.
And in regards to some of the themes that seem to be increasing, particularly around racial abuse, have we had a change in personnel that may be escalating some of that, or is there just a general increase in that space?
I don't think I can comment on that other than to say that this is an area that we've put some focus onto, and we've been involving the frontline staff in developing a charter in regard to that. And so perhaps staff are actually more aware of what we're deeming to be issues that they should report into PeopleSafe. And so that could be why it's come through, but that's just my...
That's fine. And then just my final question is, in terms of the process for people who are at the receiving end, particularly of abuse, which seems to be increasing, what process does the organisation undertake to provide support to those people, I guess not just as an immediate response, but in the follow-up?
Yeah, so we have a debriefing sort of session, and we involve an external provider to assist in that. Staff that require it, of course, can use our EAP processes, but this is part of the frontline safety project that we've been working on, and so we were calling it sort of professional supervision, but that's not quite what it is. In terms of those staff who are in these sorts of roles, that they do get a chance to debrief and talk about it amongst themselves and all the rest of it to try and make staff feel more comfortable in these situations and support them afterwards, as you've indicated. So we do have a process there now.
Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the report. I had a question. I think my interest was tweaked, really. Page 60 in the table A, where in the comments you talk about further work is being undertaken to identify how the information we're capturing on contractor incidents can be collated into this report. So I suppose my question was why?
Oh, why? Sorry. So our contract managers gather a lot of information, and that's been collated in infrastructure, and they have that information. What we're trying to work through is how we can have a process that allows us to uplift that information and include it into this report to make sure that we're not missing stuff. And we've been working closely with infrastructure on that.
So that's information that's already in the organisation. We're just trying to bring it forward into this report. Yes. Thank you. That's helpful. I suppose my question then is, if we're just looking at numbers, that doesn't, when we look at numbers for staff, we know what that's a proportion of, but for contractors, we don't have that line of sight. Is that something that could be, like, is this 4 out of 100 or is it 4 out of 4,000?
Perhaps I'd ask Sarah to answer that if that's all right.
Well, I don't need to know the numbers. I just want to know if there's some kind of perspective we can bring to those numbers in this report.
I think so.
For you, Madam Chair, the questions that we ask the contractor relate to the hours that they're working for us, so that all of the reports we get of incidents and things like that are in relation to the hours worked for us. So it is kind of like proportioning it to the number of staff, but only the number of staff who are working on our projects. If that makes sense.
That does make sense. I'd just like to see that frame represented in the report, otherwise those numbers don't actually tell us a great deal.
Cool, so we can make sure that it is in reflection of the amount of people who are working on our jobs. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just very quickly, thanks for the report, but just in terms of curiosity, the second bullet point on page 67 talks about the exit surveys and reasons for leaving job dissatisfaction, career and salary. Just in terms of job dissatisfaction, are there any sort of themes in there that could be learnings for our organisation?
Sorry. When I looked at that information, I was just looking at the reasons that were given rather than going into detail about that. But we do look at the exit surveys, and we're trying to improve the quality of those, particularly in the number of people who are completing them. So I don't have a direct answer for you there, no.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. And I guess 53 surveys completed versus 91 last year, so is there any reason for the dip?
I think it would be, oh, sorry, I'm just trying to think. I think that would be year to date rather than a direct comparison. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So my questions are about the turnover in the June quarter. So it's on page 66. So you have put a comment that the year had seen a significant increase in turnover. But what I'm not very clear about is the figures. So the turnover for the June quarter was 6.38%, but the turnover for the 12-month period was 19.3%. So if, how can I make this clear? I guess what that's saying to me is that there's been a much higher turnover in June than you would expect from a quarter. Is that a fair? Yeah. Okay, so why do we think that is?
I think the market at the moment is very attractive for people. You know, we're having antidote, we know that people are being shoulder tapped and chased by recruiters all the time at the moment. And so I think, you know, it's not just the council that is having higher turnover, it is universal in New Zealand, but we are trying to reduce that. Perhaps the comment I've made in there that the number of people who have resigned since or towards the end of the period, looking, you know, that have handed in their resignation isn't as high as it has been, so maybe June was just a little bit of it. But we'll have a look at that at the next quarter, but we're actively trying to actively trying to retain staff. You know, it's just as important as attracting staff, or more important, really. Yeah.
So what are we doing to try and retain staff, Wayne?
So we're just about at the. We've been reviewing remuneration as one of the key things to make sure that we're in line with the market, and that's we're currently in negotiations around that, and so we are hoping that that will have an impact. That will bring us more in line with the market. As you're aware, the current CPI for the June quarter was 7.3, so that is significantly higher than what was anticipated when we set the budgets or when we were looking at that. That's going to be problematic, but that should reduce. We're expecting that to go down. So remuneration is one thing. I think the other areas that you're always looking at is around the culture of the organisation and being inclusive and all of those sorts of things that have a big impact on why people come to work. So, you know, it's not just here we'll pay more money, because money is a hygiene factor. It's if you can get that off the table, it's all the other things that make people want to stay and be attracted to the organisation, and that's what we're looking at. You know, does that cover what you're looking for there, Councillor?
Well, to some degree, yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Wayne. Couple of questions. One relates to 2A on page 60 around the hazards. Can you just tell us what happens once hazards are identified?
Yep. So I'll go first. So when we identify hazard, then immediately you look. So that comes out of investigating what's going on. You've identified a hazard. Then you look to see what sort of steps or processes, or so you look to eliminate the hazard first, and then what processes you can put in place to reduce the likelihood of harm coming from that hazard. So that's it's done at where the manager of the hazard, or where the hazard's been identified. It also goes to the health and safety group, who will look assist with that in terms of working through it. So we'll look at things like bow tie assessments, about what controls you put in place and all of that sort of stuff. Yep.
Thank you. So in terms of the information, oh, sorry, carry on.
If I can comment further, Councillor, taking more a risk-based approach around the hazards. So whilst I've only been here a couple of months, just a little bit of significant work in understanding the risks and hazards here in Council. So from my view and from the view of the Act, it's taking a more the look around the risk or the hazard causing it. And at the moment, it's just people's behaviour that's been quite a concern, and there's been a lot of work in terms of mitigation around that.
Great, thank you, Selwyn, and thank you, Wayne, as well. My follow-up question's around the information that's tracked around that, and is there a summary information available of how many risks are eliminated, how many are mitigated, how many are accepted, and kind of the risk profile around those?
A lot of our information comes out of People Safe, and I'm trying to get an understanding on how, if it fits the organisation. I'm used to systems that gives me more data. I'm currently working with People Safe to understand if it can be improved, to give us factual data, and probably some of the concerns I have is the investigation process that occurs once that information goes into People Safe. So it's a project that I'm working on around how those events can be better captured, investigated, and then that information shared with the wider working community around opportunities for improvement and learnings.
I think the other thing, if you look at the 12 critical risks that's in the table below, that's the 12 that we spent a lot of time identifying as being the risks that could have the worst outcome. And so we've actually done full bow ties on those that list all the controls, and then we're looking, if there is a incident relating to a critical risk, then you look to see was there an issue with the controls we have in place, and do we need to revisit those? And we've gone through, as in this report, it says that we've fully reviewed 4, and we're working on the other 8. But at the same time, we're actually looking to make sure that those 12 are still relevant, and that we need to. Are there any others that have come forward since we identified these ones? So that'll be further reported at a little later date.
Thank you both. My second area of questions relates to 2G, which is starts page 64, I think. The question itself is around information on page 65. Wayne, you'll probably recall in the last meeting there was an exchange around the people feedback survey and the information there in terms of self-reporting around being safe from harm, safe from bullying, and the request was around having something more than an average there, so having an understanding of the distribution. My understanding was that was forthcoming. Could I just understand why we have a report that doesn't include it?
Apologies there, that was missed out. But we will, go back and look at that information and be able to give you further information. And hopefully in the near future we'll be running the next survey on to be able to add that to that. So if we can't, yes, I will remedy that error.
Thank you. Is there information there before 2020 as well that could be reported? We have done some surveys prior to that, but whether they've got the specific questions around this in, I'm not sure. But I can go back and, if you would like that to happen, I can let you know whether that's possible or not. Thank you. That would be helpful. Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm now going to adjourn for morning tea because it's 10:30. So there is someone else in the queue, so we will continue questions at 11 o'clock. So all the staff that are in here and then the new ones, please, you're more than welcome. Okay, everybody. Well, it's the first time since I've been Chair of Finance that I'm actually been late to my meeting, so. 2 minutes. 2 minutes past. Oh, yeah. Okay, so everybody, we'll go back to, where were we? The Health and Safety and Wellbeing Report of April to June 22, and we were just finishing questions. So I have Pat Hancock in the queue, so over to you, Pat.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, for allowing me to come back into the queue. And it's just really just a little tidy-up question there, Wayne, just in respect of the analysis around, or any analysis around job dissatisfaction as being a motivator for people to leave the City Council, and really just picking up on sort of an opportunity about staff retention. Would we need a recommendation for that to be included into future reports?
I'll take a note of that and include it.
Thank you, Wayne. That's my only question. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, councillors, is there anyone else in the queue before I sign off? No, so thank you, gentlemen. Right, I'll just read the recommendation. The committee resolved to receive the memorandum titled Health, Safety and Wellbeing Report, April to June 2022, presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on the 28th of September 2022. Do I have a mover? Thank you, the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Naylor. So, Deputy Mayor, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do just want to make a brief comment. Because I guess this area is still an area of concern to me, particularly around retention, culture, wellbeing and turnover. And I guess, I mean, our people here in this organisation are our most important asset, and so I do hope that we continue to prioritise investing in our staff to ensure they're not just well-resourced in terms of staffing numbers, but also around wellbeing support because of the environment that people are working in. And I do know, am aware and want to acknowledge that there are plans in place and there is work in place, particularly around addressing wellbeing, but we're not quite seeing any results just yet. So I don't want my silence to be taken as satisfaction. So I do just want to say it is still an area of concern, and I do hope that that continues to be a priority for elected members to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the queue? Anyone else want to? Okay, so we'll now go to vote. And that is carried unanimously. We'll now move on to item number 10, which is the Andrew Avenue Kindergarten Reserve proposal to grant a lease on reserve land to Ruahine Kindergarten, and that's going to be presented by Bryce Hoskin, our Group Manager, Property, and just yourself, because Kathy's not here. I don't think you need two of you anyway. So over to you, Bryce. I'm sure these next three reports will be straightforward.
Yes, morning, councillors. Yes, pretty administrative matter contained in this report and the next two, so happy to consider it as read and take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Bryce. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Bryce. Probably this question is a general question for my own understanding about all these three reports. I understand that these reserves are for the community and we are handing over these reserves to these organizations for the good of the community. But I also understand that there are some commercial or private organizations running on their own land. Have we ever compared the benefits community is getting from these organizations are more than the benefits they can get from the other, say, kindergartens. My actual question is community getting any monetary benefits from these particular groups who are using council or reserves? Is there any difference in fees and?
Probably the best way to answer that, if I'm interpreting your question correctly, through the support policy that Council passed a few months back, not only did that consider things like grants and things like that, but it also wrapped in lease arrangements and how we would act through that process. And that was a reflection that for people leasing land off council, which this matter is, we don't own the building, that essentially they would be paying less than market rate if you were going to do it on a square metre basis. And that actually has some value, and that does come with a benefit to that organisation. So that support and funding policy considered all of those things as part of that. So in the most simplest way to answer your question, do these organisations leasing land off us maybe get a benefit that maybe someone not leasing land off us does? Well, the answer is probably yes, because they would be getting more favourable rental rates on the land. Whereas if they're leasing off private land, that would be up to the discretion of a private landlord to give them a good rate.
Yeah, thank you. My actual question was, are these organizations transferring that benefit or these benefits to the community? Are they reducing their fees? Are they charging less than the other organizations?
Not sure if I can answer that, sorry, Councillor. The expectation of these organisations is they are for-purpose organisations. So a kindergarten is a kindergarten, or a scout hall is to run scouting activities. And the expectation is that is a community service, hence they qualify to be on our land in the first place. Exactly whether some of this benefit has been passed through, I can't comment, sorry.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. There are no further questions.
Thank you.
So, yes, we're just going to play musical chairs for 3 times. So, we're now going to move the recommendations, and I'll just read them out. The Council approved notifying the public of the proposal to grant a land lease at Andrew Avenue Kindergarten Reserve, 9 Andrew Avenue, Palmerston North, to Ruahine Kindergarten Association Incorporated in accordance with Section 54 of the Reserves Act 1977. 2, that Council note the land area affected by the lease to Ruahine Kindergarten Association Incorporated is described as Lot 1 DP 52257. And I'm happy to move that. Councillor Naylor will second that. And Councillor Finlay, you wish to comment?
Yes, I do. My children actually went to this kindergarten, and when I was and it's still in the wheelchair and living on benefits, basically. And most of the children who go to this kindergarten come from that Roslyn area, the State House area, all on low incomes. The fees are very, very low, and they even support people who can't afford to pay the fees. They do a brilliant job there, and I will support this 100%.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Right, there's no further comments, so we'll go to vote. Right. And that is carried unanimously. We now move on to item number 11, which is Waihi Koa Park, proposal to grant a lease again. So that's on page 87, and Bryce, back into the hot seat. We'll take that as read, Bryce. Are there any questions, councillors? There being none, you may as well just stay there, Bryce, it's fine. I'll just read that out for those online. That council approves notifying the public of the proposal to grant a lease at Waihikoa Park, 74 North Street, Palmerston North to Northern Club Manawatu Incorporated in accordance with Section 54 of the Reserved Act 1977. 2, that council notes the land area affected by the lease to Northern Club Manawatu Incorporated is described as part section 237 and 238 in town of Palmerston North. I'm happy to move. Councillor Naylor, second. Are there any comments? Straightforward. There being none, we will now vote. And that is carried unanimously. And our next item, item number 12, is the grant a lease at Marina Reserve. So over to you again, Bryce.
Thank you. Happy to consider this one as read as well and take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, are there any questions on this one? Councillor Butt.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. After we lease out these places, do we still spend some money in terms of maintenance, especially this case?
Mixed is probably the case. So they have a number of obligations under the lease for how not only they look after their own facilities, but also the park in itself. Whilst there might be some wider work that council will get involved in, the vast majority probably sits with the organisations.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. There are no further questions. So thank you very much, Bryce. So I'll move the recommendations, and I'll just read them out. That council approves notifying the public of the proposal to grant a land lease at Marina Reserve at Palmerston North to Model Railway Engineering Club Incorporated in accordance with Section 54 of the Reserves Act 1977. That council notes the land area affected by the lease to Manawatu Model Engineering Club Incorporated is described as part of Lot 3 DP 29419. Happy to move, and Councillor Naylor will second. Are there any comments? There being none, we'll go straight to the vote. And that is carried unanimously. We will now move on to the final item, item number 13, committee work schedule, September the 22nd, 2022. Are there any questions or comments? I'm happy to move the work schedule. Councillor Naylor is happy to second it. Mr Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just the Audit New Zealand Management report. Was there something coming back to us how we were going to approach Audit New Zealand and its question marks over us? There was just an approach how was either going to be a plan A or a plan B. Did anything come of that, or is there?
Through you, Madam Chair, are you referring to the qualification based on the? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Chris, did you want to give an update as to conversations that have taken place regarding those 3 water measures that we are non-compliant with, please?
Gee, thanks, Cam. Yeah, it's the news is sort of not great. It's rather frustrating. So we've been engaging with DIA for some time, as you all know, and we've had a sort of hiatus of almost a year of constantly hassling them about doing the final piece with Audit New Zealand to basically take the work that we did around providing better guidelines around how to interpret some of those measures, and the action was left with Audit New Zealand. the person in DIA who was leading that work left, and it sort of finally got picked up. A new person picked it up and wrote a paper that basically said, oh, it's so long now, it's too hard to change these things. There's a new regulatory regime coming in and all these assets are going to the new three water mechanism, so our recommendation is just to sort of ignore it. So we thought, oh, that's great, that must be something endorsed by Audit New Zealand. So unfortunately, that wasn't a view that was necessarily endorsed by Audit New Zealand. So a couple of weeks ago, had another meeting with the Deputy Auditor General for Local Government, Mark Maloney, I think his name is, and a few other people from Audit New Zealand with DIA. Massively frustrating conversation. Audit New Zealand denying they ever had another action to do. Bottom line is that we've been invited to write to the Office of the Auditor General around the issue generally, and something that can be then considered by their technical committee, who could basically come back and say, yeah, look, we'll just leave it for now. I don't have a huge amount of confidence around that, but actually it is our only play at the moment, so I'm just waiting for a draft of that letter from DIA. They were due to get it by today, and that'll be sent off, and Auditor General thinks they can turn it around within a couple of weeks. Where it could end up landing, we hope, is that it won't completely go away, but rather than being a matter that will result in a qualified opinion, it could become a matter of emphasis, and which is basically just something that is noted but not sort of brings it back in the severity level. So that's where we're hoping this is going to land. But yes, very frustrating after all the work we've done, and it's basically gone into a hole. So I continue to try and fight the good fight on behalf of the sector.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the update.
Are there any further questions? No, we'll go to vote then. And that is carried unanimously. Oh, that was good. We had a whole day of unanimous voting. So, right, well, this is the final meeting of the Finance and Audit Committee. So I would just like to thank my Natalia and Hannah, the admin team, and the staff, and all the financial team and the ELT. And I'd like to thank my Deputy Chair, Councillor Naylor, and Mr Armstrong, thank you. That's the first time we've had an independent person on the team, and it's worked out really well, so thank you very much for your input to it. So I'd just like to thank everybody, and thank you to Janine if she's listening to this, for the things that she didn't put on the paper. So thank you very much, everybody. 10 sleeps.